Well, hello, and welcome to the Goldwater Institute's special book event for You're Not Alone, the Conservative Woman's Guide to College. I'm Christina Sandefur, and I'm the Executive Vice President here at the Goldwater Institute. If you haven't heard of us, we're a free market think tank, and we work in capitals, courtrooms, and communities all across the country. And our mission is to empower people to live freer and happier lives. And relevant to this event, I'm also actually a proud advisory board member of the Network of Enlightened Women. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by my friend Karin Lips. She is the founder and president of the Network of Enlightened Women, or NEW for short, and she's the author of the book that we're going to discuss today. And I'm also joined by Teel. She's the president of the new chapter of the University of Arizona, and she's also a current Ronald Reagan fellow here at the Goldwater Institute, where she does really stellar work in our communications department. So welcome, ladies. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you both.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, before we get started, Karin, I'd love it if you could just tell me a little bit about the Network of Enlightened Women. What is it and why did you start it?
Yes, I started it for many of the reasons why I also wrote the book is that when I was at the University of Virginia, I was very interested in policy and politics and even went to DC to intern one summer for my home state senator, Senator Lugar, and really enjoyed being around other women who wanted to talk about policy and not necessarily just from a Republican or Democrat perspective, but people who really wanted to get into the nuances of the argument and have productive conversations, not yelling at each other, but those productive conversations. And so I went back to UVA for my third year of college and sought out that environment. Christina even went to our women's center, which you'd think a women's center at a state funded university would be open to all women. But unfortunately, that was not my experience. I had a meeting with one of the faculty members there. She told me about their programs. I got the sense they were all a little bit further left, but asked if they would be interested in co-sponsoring a new group for conservative women. She looked at me like I was crazy, chuckled, and said, "Not here." And that's when I decided to start the Network of Enlightened Women, or NEW, as a community for conservative women, a community in which we could be educated, one in which we could have kind of the civil conversations about things, and one that could really foster our leadership development. So, in the same way that with the book, I partly wrote it because so many women felt alone. Um, I felt more lonely as a conservative woman on campus at UVA, and so created NEW to really build a community.
Yeah, that's great. And, I know you mentioned this in the book as well, Karin, but when you talk about community and I think that's really important. I do think a lot of times people think about being conservative or being libertarian or even being liberal as just a political identity, and that all we want to do is talk about politics and candidates all the time. And I think many of us don't want to talk about those things at all. We want to talk about principles, and we also just want an opportunity to, experience life together and belong to a community. So I think that's really, really fantastic. And I think that message is really going to resonate with students that are entering college or are in college right now. Well, Karin, as a current student, as one of those students, you've been involved with new leadership for some time. And you've been able to connect with like-minded people and students at your university. So just tell me a little bit about what that's been like leading NEW and being able to use that organization that Karin started to really enhance your experience at the University of Arizona.
Yeah, definitely. So I started college during COVID, which was definitely really challenging, socially, also just academically, being able to make connections on campus and get involved. So I actually discovered NEW through social media. One of the girls leading the chapter at U of A was running an Instagram page, and I had never heard of it, but I was really curious about it, especially being an all women's group, like, oh, what is this? This is something different. So I kind of just showed up at one of the meetings on a whim. I didn't know any of the girls who were in it until the first meeting that I showed up to. And I'm pretty introverted, so it was definitely kind of hard for me to put myself out there and, just see what NEW was all about, but that's what I did. And I'm so happy I did, because I've been able to find so many amazing resources through the club. As both Karin and Christina mentioned, it's not only about talking about politics and policy, but the social aspect of the club is so important as well. So I became amazing friends with the women that I met that first day that I came to the club meeting. We're all still friends today, even though a few of them have graduated already. So just having that support from like-minded women, even if you're not talking about politics, but just other life challenges, professional challenges, personal challenges, has been really helpful for me as an individual. But then also the professional resources that NU provides have been really amazing. So through NU, we often host different speakers, different educational workshops, development workshops, and one of the speakers we hosted at our chapter was actually Christina from the Goldwater Institute, and she came and talked about her work and what Goldwater is doing. And I had heard a little bit about Goldwater before, but it wasn't really on my mind as somewhere to possibly intern at until I interacted with Christina in person. So NU really facilitated that connection for me that I made with Christina that day. And then after that, I was able to go home, read more about Goldwater, look at the application, and apply for the Ronald Reagan Fellowship. And I have had such an amazing time at that fellowship. It's really helped me determine what I want to do working in a career in the liberty movement. So all of these amazing things came about through the network of enlightened women. And of course, this year I became president of the club. So that's really challenged me to develop my leadership skills, manage different projects, learn how to coordinate events, all while being a college student at the same time. So developing a lot of real world skills that I think will be really valuable in the future for me.
Well, that's really great. And it's such a good point, Cameron, that I think what the Network of Enlightened Women and what this book really do is it's not only helpful to college students to, find their way through college and find community and find opportunities for internships in their career, but it also helps those of us who are on the other side of things, who are prospective employers or looking to connect with really bright, engaging young women like yourself, who are looking for those opportunities. So I think the community is an even broader one that you've created, Karin, and it's really fantastic. But let's talk about this book.
And Christina, I love the sort of the pipeline role, right, that NU can play, right? Bringing people
Yes.
in movement, feeding them to state-based think tanks like Goldwater. I think that's great. And, we're still very much chapter-based on college campus, but also have some young professional chapters and then some national programs as well. So it's great to get to have Cameron on here and really see that almost 20 years after starting the organization, that you see a social media post, you come to it, and then it's sort of changing your career trajectory. I think that's awesome, and I love that you shared your story, Cameron.
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's really. I mean, I know we've talked about this before, Karin, but I like you. I wish something like NU had existed when we were students, and so I'm so glad that you've taken that opportunity, maybe seen the vacuum that existed when we were students and created something that just has really facilitated these amazing connections. And with that, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the book. So here's the book right here that you wrote, Karin, You're Not Alone, A Conservative Woman's Guide to College. And you mentioned when we began that the reasons why you wanted to write the book were similar to the reasons why you created the network in the first place. But let's kind of go through and touch on a few topics in the book now. As we have this conversation, I do want to let viewers know that at any time, if you have questions for any of the panelists, you can please feel free to type them. There's a question box on Zoom, so feel free to type them at any time. I'm going to incorporate as many as I can into our discussion, so I'll keep an eye on that. But Karin, let's start by talking a little bit about choosing a college. We certainly won't be able to go through all the topics in the book, and that's why I encourage listeners to pick up a copy of the book for themselves if they are students who are looking at a college, if they are college students, if you're a parent or a grandparent of someone who is thinking about college or in college. But for those who are listening right now, who are thinking about college and are conservative minded and are trying to decide where they want to go to college. What advice do you have for them? That's such a big decision. So what advice do you have for conservative women who are thinking about where to go to college?
It is, but it's also why I started the book on this topic, because in my experience, I think some people make this decision in maybe a less serious fashion. And you really do need to put some thought into it. And, you know, some of these schools advertise things like a zip line or all year round snow skiing, but like that might be fun, but shouldn't be, in my opinion, what you base your college decision on. So I think there's some other factors that are really important to pay attention to. One, of course, is researching the academic offerings. If you know what you want to major in, or even if you don't, then you might want something with more a school that has a lot of options. But really figuring out what are the academic offerings that are there at your school. Also, looking at and researching the intellectual diversity and whether a school takes that seriously. And one signal of that is whether a university has signed on to the Chicago Statement. And you can find that on FIRE's website. They list out what schools have signed on to it, but trying to get a sense of if the atmosphere on campus is open to free thinking or not, because that can really be determinative of someone's college experience. Another factor, and this is something I didn't know that much about until I was in college, but a number of universities now have centers or some type of relationship with an institution that's really open-minded and is supportive of conservative and libertarian thinking. So there's different institutes at different universities, and I list some of them at the book in the book that lay out, okay, what are some of these institutions that really serve as a beacon for the right of center students on campus. And that's a great way to, from day one, to go to those, build relationships with professors and other students, to have that community from the very beginning. And then one other factor to think about is the potential career earnings and what you want to do after school. It was interesting, FreeOp, a think tank, someone there put together analysis both of schools and also college majors about what really the career earnings were afterwards. And it was interesting that it wasn't just the university that was important, but also what your major was. So I think thinking through that, because college, as we know, is very expensive. And if you take on a lot of student loans, that can really influence your career after college and some of the decisions that you make and give you less flexibility. So thinking through, okay, not only what is the cost of college, but then when I get out of school, what is going to be my career potential? So those are a few of the factors that I mentioned in the book. And Christina, the book's divided into 4 parts. You know, some of those pre-questions, like before college, of how do you pick a college. Then I'd say like the social atmosphere and what you're going to face on college campuses, because I think that is something that our students are very interested in sharing their experience on, because I think for many of them, it's very different than what they expected. And then how to get involved in conservative organizations and build that community. And then it ends with, okay, after college, how do you get those dream internships or jobs so that you're set up after college? So really going through the college experience.
Yeah. And, you know, I think what you said about thinking ahead to what type of career you want to have and what the earnings might look like with regard to choosing a college and choosing a major is a really good point, Karin. As somebody who, you know, is an employer at a free market organization that is a nonprofit, that is something, you know, it's such a rewarding job, and we'll get into jobs and internships a little bit later. But it certainly was a dream job for me. It remains a dream job for me today. But I really thought about that a lot. I took that piece of advice to heart. I had gotten it myself when I was a student. And, you know, the immense joy that I get from and personal fulfillment from being able to contribute to a cause that I believe in, and have a job that, you know, I really get up every day. I'm excited to go to it. I feel like I'm making a difference in the world, and I have maybe some more flexibility than other people in legal or policy careers might have. Yeah, the trade-off, of course, is when you work for a nonprofit, you're probably not going to be making the same amount of money that you would make in the private sector. And I think that choosing a college that, you know, is reflective of that, right? Something that maybe you find a college that you can get a scholarship to, and it might not be the college that has the zip line or the college that's, you know, on the beach in Hawaii or whatever else, but it's one that's going to be just as academically rigorous, and yet you know, something that maybe you won't be quite as much in debt. I think that can be very freeing, because I did that when I chose my college. I chose some where I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship. And it helped me, it gave me the freedom to be able to choose a job and a career once I graduated that I really wanted, and not one that, you know, had to match the massive amount of debt that I had acquired. So very, very good advice there. But I want to move the conversation now a little bit to what you had said, Karin, like some of the things that students either are experiencing or can expect to experience on a college campus if they are conservative, libertarian, free market oriented. So let's talk a little bit about that. And actually, we have a question here from the audience that's relevant. So this one is about student experience. So I will direct it to you, Cameron. You've probably had to navigate situations on campus where you're surrounded by a lot of students that don't share the same political or philosophical beliefs as you. So what are some ways that conservative students can engage with their peers who might hold those different beliefs, and what have you done and what have you found to work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first of all, you have to kind of know your audience and who you're dealing with. There are going to be some people at the end of the day, whether it's a professor or your fellow peers, who are just always going to be very hostile, and they're really more interested in arguing and engaging in those personal attacks. And so if you see that and you don't really see any hope that that person is really going to change their mind, or maybe they don't have any genuine interest in even trying to learn from you, that might not be someone who you want to invest your time in. So I think it's important to establish like a ground level of respect. I think as long as you respect your professor or your peers, and you can engage in a dialogue in a healthy way that doesn't involve those personal attacks, that can be very fruitful. And also just being like willing to put yourself out there and do that, without automatically fearing that there is going to be some sort of retaliation or a negative reaction. I would say that many times at the University of Arizona that I've taken that step to be more bold in my beliefs, I have been met with more positive feedback than I would have expected. Or maybe you don't realize that there are people in your classes or even a professor who agrees with you more than you thought that they did. And you won't know that or discover that until you're willing to open yourself up and engage in those conversations with them. So that would be my advice, would be, you know, be respectful, find people who respect you, and be willing to be bold in your beliefs.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And Karin, I'd like to get your perspective too, because, you know, one of the things that you pointed to in the book is that there are studies that have surveyed conservative students and liberal students, and they've found that conservatives seem generally to be more willing to befriend people who don't necessarily share their political beliefs than liberals are. And this can be, I think, really daunting and scary, knowing this for students who are, again, conservative or libertarian minded and going into school. They can do the things that you recommended. They can try to find a university that, you know, that will be more conducive to sharing and open thought. But at the end of the day, if this is the environment that they're walking into, what advice do you have for those students so that, you know, that they can have a community, and that they can branch out and maybe, you know, make the most of their experience?
Let's get into the numbers a little bit, Christina, because I think this is fascinating. So right now, college women make up about 60% of bachelor's degrees, right? So college women make up a majority of college students. And then if you break down college women, about 58% self-identify as liberal, while about 15% self-identify as conservative.
Wow.
Yeah, but what's fascinating is when we talk to women in our network, they often feel like it's more like 90% liberal women to like 10% conservative women. And I think that's partly because of the social ostracization that many of them feel. So I think there's more conservative and libertarian women on campuses, yet then will speak out. Yet because they're being quiet, it makes the people who actually are speaking out feel like their numbers are much lower than they are. So I think that's one set of numbers that's really interesting. And then you reference there's this one study that I cite in the book that found that 71% of Democrats on campus wouldn't go on a date with, and 37% wouldn't be friends with somebody who voted for the opposing presidential candidate. Among Republicans, it was 31% wouldn't date, and only 5% would not be friends with someone. So then you have, kind of adding to this, you have Democrats who aren't willing, if someone's outspoken as a Republican or voting for a Republican candidate, specifically in this poll, that they're not going to be friends with them. So it does create this weird social pressure that I don't think we can underestimate the power of that social pressure that conservatives, and specifically conservative women, face on campus. So I think it's good to acknowledge it and what these women are facing. Um, and then some advice we have for these women is, creating that community matters. Also being really strategic about how to engage their peers. So for example, we often have strong opinions. You can often make, a number of different arguments, but figuring out who is your audience, who are you trying to convince, and then trying to make your argument in a way that will be convincing to them, right? Like if you've got 3 ways you can make an argument, pick the one without changing your view that might appeal to them. And then, Christina, I know, for example, an issue you and I have both worked on is occupational licensing reform, which, is not the hottest like button issue that's out there. And so I think it actually gives people a chance on the right to make the case, because a lot of people on the left haven't thought about it and don't have their opinion yet. So I think it's smart to find some of these issues that not everybody already has a knee-jerk reaction on, and talk about them and say, like, do you think it's fair that women face, a barrier to entry on this issue, and kind of get into it without sort of those preconceived notions. And I feel like that's a way that young women, on campuses can kind of find some of those issues. And that can be a helpful way where they can learn and practice convincing their peers.
No, I think that's a great point, Karin. And, I think this goes back to the distinction between politics and policy or philosophy, right? Is that politics, especially today, can be very divisive, very vitriolic. It's always us versus them. Whereas with a lot of these policy issues that affect women, there is actually a lot of unanimity when people really sit down and think about the issue. And again, I think we can assume that most people are well intending, and they want what's best for women. And so it's really a matter of talking about these issues like occupational licensing, talking through them and saying, like, actually, if we want to empower people to live the lives that they want to live and have the most flexibility and freedom, these more freedom oriented policies, breaking down these needless regulations, that's the way to get there. And so I think that's very, very good advice. Now, on college campuses, it isn't just other students that conservative women are going to face or going to have to think about, but sometimes it's the campuses themselves. And certainly, we've all heard about threats to free speech on college campuses and the rise of that today. It could be speakers that are shouted down, or maybe even facing violence. It could be colleges that are policing the language that students could use. It could be these bias response teams that encourage students of certain political persuasions to report or tell on people, simply for expressing their political beliefs. So again, that can be very daunting. And I think that there's this perception out there, at least, that these types of systems today are really aimed against women that consider themselves to be conservative, more so than women that consider themselves to be liberal. So first, Karin, I'd like to just ask you, do you think that observation is true? And how do you think the political climate on college campuses has changed and is different from, when you and I were in college? Do you think that it's gotten worse? Do you think it's gotten better? Do you think the perceptions out there that these college institutions are actually set up to be sort of antithetical to conservative or libertarian beliefs is reality? What do you think?
Well, I think that from a free speech and an intellectual diversity perspective, things have gotten worse on college campuses. I think the trend is going in the wrong direction, unfortunately. And I think part of the issue is now students face just so many threats in these different areas. So we've talked already about sort of the peer-to-peer social censoring and silencing that's happening. Also, faculty, right? I feel like years ago you'd hear more stories about faculty, but it's not just faculty who are being unfair in the classroom, but now you add to that the kind of bloated administrations on these college campuses, that administrators, like the number of administrators has grown dramatically. And many of their role is to kind of get in the middle of what's going on campus and influence the direction, and they're pushing it left. On campuses. We've now seen with some of our student chapters that they're now facing a struggle to even get recognized on campus. So when I was at the University of Virginia, I remember there was a process that we had to go through, but there were hundreds of clubs at UVA, and my sense was that the university's thought was, okay, students want to take initiative, start a club, let them try, and let's see if the market demands the club, right? If no one shows up, the club will go away. But if people are interested, it'll keep going. Well, now we're just seeing more, I would say, university presence in this club recognition process. So we've had a few campuses this semester where they've gotten their application denied or postponed. And it seems to be for substantive reasons. At a few of them where it's questioning, one university, the response was, we already have a women's club on campus. Why is your club unique? And that's the problem, right? The thought that you only need one women's club on campus and that women all think the same. So I think this sort of growing, I would almost say like a growing administrative state on college campuses is a problem. And so that's another threat that students are facing, that we're not relying on just demand, but a lot of administrators are inserting themselves into this process. So I think there are kind of a lot of threats. And that's why in this book, I laid out, in a chapter on free speech, here are some potential threats that you may face on campus. So that, because I think a lot of students go to campus and they don't know what bias reporting teams are, right? Like I wouldn't have known what that was before I got to campus. And so what I'm hoping to do in this book is for students, but also parents and grandparents and people interested in colleges, just identifying where are some of these potential threats coming from. So when a student faces one of them, they don't feel so alone, right? It's not like, oh, well, I was just told by this group or this administrator I can't do it. Well, if they know this is part of a larger trend,
Yeah.
or that it's something that, other people have faced censoring on, then they might be more willing to speak up, go to an organization that fights back against some of these things and feel empowered to push back.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, I think even though this book and this discussion is really geared toward students or parents of students, I think it's a good message for faculty to keep in mind as well, because I think there are a lot of them that also feel bullied into silence or feel like they don't want to speak up and engage with these groups. And I know, when I was in law school, I was a member of the Federalist Society at my law school. It was a very big chapter and very well supported. And we had a faculty advisor who was a constitutional law professor, and he was willing to, even though he didn't even always agree with every viewpoint that we presented, he was willing to associate with the group, and he was great. And he helped us facilitate speakers and bring, one of the things that's great about Federalist Society is it seeks to bring debate to campus. So it wasn't like we were all just talking about the same perspectives. In fact, there's, as you know, Karin, from your days in law school, there's a wide variety of perspectives amongst those who belong to the Federalist Society. And so it does feel like things have shifted, because now as somebody who sometimes speaks at Federalist Society events at law schools, I find that I'll come in to talk about issues like occupational licensing, or how capitalism can actually, and free markets can actually empower women. And we look for somebody, a faculty member, to present, an opposing viewpoint or commentary. And these days it seems like they're just unwilling to even engage with the Federalist
And
Society.
that's such a problem,
It
right?
is.
You're lawyers, right? Or you're going to become lawyers, right? You should engage. You should be willing to have those debates and discussions.
Yeah, and I think it sets a tone for the students then, that this isn't worth engaging with, or that, the students, I mean, if you're a student, you would feel intimidated maybe if your teachers and members of the faculty aren't even willing to engage and speak out and have these discussions and debates, then why should you feel that way as a student? So it is a real problem. But, I think I think that we are making progress. And Cameron, actually, as we're discussing what it's like on college campuses and engaging with administrations, we got another question that came in specifically about student clubs. So you are involved in student clubs and are a leader of a student club, new, and you are somebody who has facilitated speakers coming onto campus. In fact, you, as we talked about before, invited me onto your college campus to speak. And so um, what do you find that experience has been like? We know that sometimes it's difficult working with administrations to bring speakers to campus that the administration might deem as controversial. What has your experience been like there, and how have you navigated that to get good quality speakers that really can uh, debate and discuss ideas that that might not otherwise be debated or discussed on a university campus?
Yeah, I would say through new specifically, I haven't personally had any major issues at my university with speakers, but I have definitely heard similar stories of a lot of just bureaucracy and roadblocks that clubs face to even operate or get those speakers on campus. And I do agree with Karen that it often does seem like there is a bias in that. I've heard stories about like our Turning Point chapter struggling to get recognized or even sign up for club fairs. Meanwhile, all sorts of other groups are going through the process like a breeze. So I would say there is definitely a bias, but if you're able to make like good connections on your campus, maybe with a faculty member who is going to be a solid advisor for your club, that could really help to have someone in your corner to kind of navigate that if you're struggling with the administration. So that would probably be my recommendation to anyone who is a leader on their campus or involved with a more conservative, libertarian leaning organization.
And I know, Karen, in the book, one of the things you advise students of is to know their rights, and to know that they are entitled to be able to bring speakers on campus. They're entitled, of course, to be able to have their events, even if people want to disagree or to protest, that's all fine, but they should be able to have speakers come on campus that aren't going to be canceled or shouted down or threatened with violence. And diversity of opinion and thought should exist in our public universities. And so I would encourage folks to, I mean, certainly at the Goldwater Institute, this is a big issue for us. We've done a variety of things, both in state legislatures and in courtrooms when necessary, in order to defend students' rights to be able to put on those events and to have discussions and debates rather than shutting one side down. And so, if need be, if you're really getting pushback on campus, familiarize yourself with your rights, read the book, and reach out if you need to organizations like NEW or the Goldwater Institute, or a host of other organizations that you've mentioned in the book, Karen, that can help you. I do think it's important. Certainly, it's unfortunate that it comes to that sometimes. I think a lot of times students just want to have discussions and debates and learn, and they don't want to have to engage a faculty member or even, dare say, a lawyer in order to just be able to have a reasonable debate on campus. But I do think that when it comes to that, it really is important that we insist that our rights to free speech be respected and that we have that intellectual diversity on campus, because to me, that is one of the most important things about college, is that we learn and we grow and we keep open minds and we discuss. Well, another thing that students, of course, go to college for is not just to broaden their intellectual horizons generally, but of course to prepare themselves for life after graduation, which oftentimes comes with selecting a job or a career. And so the book does discuss a lot about that as well, Karen. We talked a little bit about choosing a major, but we also talk about how students should really think about what career they want after college, while they are going through college. And so what are some things that students should consider during college when making that choice? And what are some things that students, especially conservative women, should focus on skill development while they're in college?
Well, I think being one of the key lessons or themes, I think, from the book is to try to be thoughtful or purposeful about your decisions in college. So things might change. You might not go in knowing exactly what you want to do. And even if you think you do, it might change, but be thoughtful about it. So things like when you're picking your college major, um, you might think about both the career earnings aspect. And one example of this is if you're really focused on career earnings, then you might not want to pick a women's studies major because we know that engineers is one of the top paid majors. Women's studies is ranked something like 692nd. So thinking about, okay, in terms of if career earnings is your most important factor, select your major that might set you up for success there. But at the same time, for many of us, career earnings isn't the only thing that's important, right? Christina, you talked about that earlier. So if you think that you want flexibility in your career, set yourself up with a major and a career path that might give you that. I think a great example of this is if you like writing and communications, being a political journalist might sound really fun and exciting. But if you do that career, that likely means that you're going to be in DC and that, you're going to be working Friday nights when there's news dumps and, you got to work when there's news, right? You don't have as much flexibility. But if what you really enjoy in all that is the writing, maybe you go into more of a general marketing and then you can find a job, that has more flexibility. You might even be able to start your own business where you can get your own clients and do different types of communications projects. So thinking through, okay, what type of career might set me up for the life that I want? And for many of us, that's getting married, having kids, and with that comes often a desire for flexibility. I know it has for me. So thinking through, okay, what kind of career can you do that will allow you to set up the life that you want? So I think thinking through your college major and being a little bit more strategic about that is a good thing to do. And then also building relationships with faculty. And I actually include a whole chapter in the book on this, but specifically building relationships with conservative faculty who can be mentors, write letters of recommendation, or serve as references for you, or connect you to people. I think that's underrated on college campuses, and that students don't spend enough time building relationships with faculty. And that can unlock a whole host of career options. So I think thinking through not just what your college major is going to be, but also what relationships can you develop. And then lastly, I'll say, running a student club builds a lot of skills. And so I encourage any student viewers to really think about whatever they're interested in, think about becoming a leader in your club, because by doing so, you demonstrate a lot of important skills that translate across a lot of fields. Things like, organizing, planning events, often fundraising. If you're bringing in, some type of speaker, you have to fundraise, you have to market, you've got to bring people with different views together, even often among your own leadership. And then making sure you translate those on your resume. I find sometimes students undersell their skills. So if you are a leader of a club, make sure you think about what are the skills that you're developing, and then how do you present those on your resume. And don't shortchange yourself. Make sure to share, all those skills that you've developed and try to translate them to how do they translate into what skills you would use at the job you're applying for. So those are just a few things to think about.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And one of the things that I really liked about the book, Karin, is that you not only talk about what happens in the classroom and the traditional things people think about when they're on college campuses, like your major, but also how students can really take advantage of other opportunities that frankly you sometimes only get in college, right, in order to prepare yourself for life after. And of course, you've mentioned mentorships. I highly recommend that. Networking generally, you talk a lot about, which I think is critical to securing that job pathway. And then internships. And, as somebody who, when I was in college and law school, I took advantage of internships. I knew I wanted to work in the freedom movement. And I worked hard to network and to secure internships at several prominent organizations in the freedom movement. And I can say today that was probably the single most important factor in getting to where I am today in my career and being able to do this dream job. So I would like to make a push for internships, and whether it be at the Goldwater Institute or at another free market think tank or nonprofit. And I also think working at nonprofits, or even in the government, as a libertarian, I can still encourage people to to take on work in government. But I do think that those are uniquely special types of internships because you get a lot of hands-on work early on. And so I'd actually like to ask you about that, Cameron, because that's kind of the pathway that you took. You talked a little bit about that at the beginning, but how have you taken advantage of opportunities to network with folks while you've been in college? What things do you think have been beneficial to you in interning at Goldwater and meeting other mentors? And how are you working through this process that Karen's kind of outlined in the book to set yourself up for your career
Mhm.
after college?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, New has been a huge resource for that, because it not only connects you to other like-minded women on your campus who could be resources for you or maybe have connections, but there's also such a large alumni network with New. So I feel confident that if I were to reach out to Karen or somebody at New and say, hey, like I really want to work in this field, or I'm thinking about applying for a job with this nonprofit, that there would be some way to get me connected with someone who knows about that or maybe even works at that organization already. So that is such a major resource to be able to have when you're navigating life after college and trying to make stressful decisions about where you want to end up or going through the job application process. So definitely New is a great resource. That also helps you get connected with other organizations if you're hosting speakers, for example. So that was how I was able to connect with you, Christina, and through Goldwater. So any speaker events that you're hosting would be a great opportunity for some networking. But then in terms of the internship with Goldwater, it's been a great experience for me. It's definitely helped me learn kind of what I like and what I don't like, and really solidified the type of work that I do want to do with a free market nonprofit think tank. I've been able to develop so many skills, especially with communication specifically, that I think would translate to a lot of different roles, whether it be in politics, policy, or even another industry. And working an internship also opens you up to all of the people at that organization as a resource. So not only am I able to get help from people within the communications department and get their advice professionally, but I have attorneys at Goldwater that I could talk to about their path or what law school is like, policy experts that I could talk to if I'm interested in maybe going more that route with my work. So as long as you're willing to take advantage of those opportunities and be proactive in your internship, you kind of make of it what you will. But yeah, I would say definitely recommend an internship. I mean, even now, as I'm applying for jobs, so many of the job applications do count internships as relevant work experience. So if you're doing 1 or 2 internships, that maybe amounts to already a year technically of work experience that you have, and that can really set you apart from other candidates when you're applying for jobs.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Cameron. As an employer and a prospective employer, internships mean a lot to me when people are new in their career and seeing that they have, taken the time to do an internship, and I know that that is so valuable. Obviously, what you learn in college is valuable, but what you learn sort of on the job can be just as valuable, if not more so. And I really want to underscore something else that you said about being proactive and taking advantage of opportunities. Karin, you mentioned, connecting with conservative faculty to take advantage of mentorships. I think, when you're at an internship, again, if you're working with one person, it can't hurt to reach out to other people that are working in other parts of the organization. College really is a time of experimentation. It's a time of figuring out what you like and what you're good at, and what maybe you don't like or you're not as good at, or you need to work on, or what you need to know or who you need to know in order to get that job afterwards. And I really do think that the more that you can reach out to people and ask for their experiences and get to know them and let them get to know you and learn about you and what drives you and why you're so passionate about this job and this opportunity, it really helps set you apart from, other people who might just send in a resume and call it a day. And, as somebody who works for an organization where, and I do a lot of interviews and hiring, I love it when people reach out and ask to meet with me about career opportunities or to learn more about what it's like to work at an organization like the Goldwater Institute. And we get folks reaching out, students and conservative women reaching out that don't even intern at Goldwater. Maybe they're hoping to someday, or maybe they intern at a different organization, or maybe they've never had experience yet with an organization like this, but they'd like to learn more. And now with our technological capabilities and Zoom and things like that, it's so easy to be able to connect with somebody personally, even if they're not necessarily in your town or you can't meet up for coffee in person. So it may be a little daunting or a little awkward sometimes as a student to reach out to somebody that you don't know and ask if you could have a few minutes of their time. But I don't know if you agree, Karin, but my feeling is always the worst someone can say is no. But, and of course you respect that, but I think people say yes a lot more often than they say no. And I really love it when people reach out.
Well, and Christina, I think a lot of us really want to help students, right? Like we
Yep.
want to invest in them. We want to see them succeed. And so finding a student that maybe has some similarities to to the interest that you had when you were in college, having them reach out. It's fun to be able to share some advice that, some things you've learned. And then it's always great to get connected with them because you never know when you're going to have an opening pop up. And so it might be a great way to, start a conversation, ask some questions, build that relationship, and you never know when it's going to lead to a job.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, those of us who work in the freedom movement, obviously, we have a vested interest in seeing that work continued in the future, and we want to match good people with those jobs and know that that work is going to be continued. And I think that's true of any career. I mean, we're talking about the freedom movement because we're talking about conservative women, but of course, there are probably a lot of young women who are listening now that maybe share our philosophical beliefs, but aren't necessarily looking to get into public policy. And I think the same is true for you, though, connecting with people that are doing the jobs that you want to do. I mean, people, if they're lucky, they do a job because they really enjoy the job or they love it or it challenges them or they're good at it and they want to see like-minded people get into those jobs and succeed as well. So yes, I highly encourage you to reach out and to make those connections. And we're actually have a question here about preparing for the job market. And the student is a little bit concerned about social media. She says that social media is very prevalent right now. It's funny, Karin, because Facebook wasn't even really available when we were starting college, but now it's ubiquitous on college campuses. And actually, I'm dating myself because I'm talking about Facebook, and I've been told that that's what older people use now. And I know it's Instagram and it's Twitter or X and it's whatever, all of the other social media whatever the flavor of the day is, but it's true. It's all over the place. And it's a way that especially people in colleges use to connect with each other and express themselves. But the student says the downside to that is, what you put on the internet never really goes away. And it can impede your ability to get a job, but it can also affect, if you bring like your political persuasion into things, it can affect your ability to make friends. So I actually like to ask both of you, but we'll start with you, Cameron. What have you learned about and how do you approach social media, given that you're conservative minded, given that you're looking for a job? What things do you take into consideration?
Yeah, I would say my mindset is usually, to keep in mind that anything you're posting is possibly going to be seen by anybody in the general public. I know a lot of friends of mine who maybe have run into trouble with things that they've posted that they regret. But you have to be aware that when you're posting something, it's not only, your good friends that could see it, but really anybody who looks you up online or is researching you, employers, professors even. So you have to be aware of that, definitely. I would say you can use social media definitely for good in your career as well. And it could be a way to really present some of your accomplishments to employers or to show and demonstrate that you're able to use it in a responsible way. I definitely use LinkedIn a lot. I don't know if that's maybe kind of nerdy to some college students, but I found it to be pretty helpful with connecting professionally with people. And it's kind of a more serious platform as opposed to other social media where you can really demonstrate that side of yourself and maybe keep your personal social media a little bit more private on like a private account or something like that. That would be my recommendation. When it comes to Sharing your beliefs on your personal social media, I know that can be really scary for a lot of women, and they fear that judgment and that retaliation. I would say it just kind of depends on the person and whether you feel that it's worth it, you know, to post that online and make that a part of your social media presence. I think it can be really beneficial if you feel that you're exposing people to different perspectives, or maybe you are generating some productive debate online. That can be a great thing. But if you find that it is unproductive, or you know, people are engaging with you in a way that is just focused on those personal attacks and disrespectful, I would say it's best to avoid that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I occasionally post about politics and things like that on social media, and there have been people who, on a rare occasion, respond negatively, and you kind of just have to move past that. And if you know that that's your belief and you stand strong in it, then you can't let, you know, comments online really deter you from sharing what you want to share on your social media.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good to keep in mind. And Karin, you actually do write about social media in the book and have some advice for students. Anything you want to add to that?
The student is wise to ask this question. I include a whole chapter on the book on addressing social media. And I think that's an important topic for students as they are graduating, particularly as they're thinking about their jobs and careers. On the one hand, it can help you. We actually hired one of our communications team members in part because she was running her new chapter social media accounts, and was doing a great job. And we noticed her from that. And now she's running our social media accounts. So on the one hand, it can be very helpful professionally. On the other, it can really cause some challenges and some problems. Some people can interpret posts differently. Also, some careers, they might just not be interested in people who are building a huge presence politically, right? So in the private sector, there might not be as much interest in somebody if they're putting out very bold opinions on things. And I encourage viewers to think about it largely as their like entire social media and like online presence, not just their presence on Instagram or one platform. So for example, in New, you know, a lot of our chapter members, they have Instagram accounts. Also, we invite a few of them, like Cameron has been on our podcast, The Conservative Woman's Guide, which is a partner project with the book. So think about your larger presence, and is it something that you think potential employers would be okay with? And for some, maybe they want to be out there and want to have a very bold personality and want a career in that, and that's fine. But maybe others, you know, you don't want to have your career derailed just for, you know, one late night post or something, or, you know, one post that's easily misunderstood. So again, going back to this point about being strategic about your presence on social media and your decisions will help make it so that the options you hope are open to you upon graduation will be open to you.
I think that's very solid advice, Karin, and something that students are certainly going to have to think about. I don't think there's one person out there in college today that can avoid that question, and sitting down with themselves and thinking about, what do I want my presence on social media to look like, unless you don't have social media at all. But I think that's very few and far between. So we're almost out of time. I have one last question that I want to ask you, Karin. And that is, you know, the book is just chock full of good advice. I highly encourage folks to pick it up, but it's also got some really fun stories. And I know we've been talking about a lot of scary things on college campuses and things that conservative and freedom-minded women have to worry about and keep in mind. But there are also a lot of really great stories, and there's a lot of hope. And so I was wondering, do you have a favorite story, either from the book or otherwise, something hopeful or positive that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Oh, I love that question, Christina, and thank you again for being part of the book project and sharing your advice in it. I think one thing I really enjoy in the work, and then also in writing the book, I enjoyed was hearing, right, those hopeful stories where I felt like New made a difference in the lives of young women. So I think Cameron shared hers at the beginning, and that's awesome. And part of the reason we exist as an organization, right? She brought you to campus, and then that's led to an internship. That's awesome. Where New has felt like we've made a difference, right, in her career and in her life. There's been other stories, I think, on the social side of things where women really felt alone, and then they either started a chapter or become a member of a chapter and realized, those friends they thought were their friends weren't actually, and now they've built a much stronger friend group that will last for years to come, because they've now joined this group and this community that's really true to themselves. And I think that that's important. And then there's a few stories in there about students standing up to professors very strategically and having the professors kind of acknowledge their own bias and make a shift because our students were bold and stood up in a very appropriate, kind of professional, strategic way, and they made a difference. So I think there are some messages in here about the challenges that women face, but I present those challenges so that women can overcome them, and so that they have the tools to overcome them. So I enjoyed putting in there not just identifying the challenges, but also, okay, how can you overcome them to have a more positive experience and to truly be an ambassador for conservative and libertarian ideas in a very positive way.
Well, that's great, Karin, and the book is fantastic. I was so honored to be a part of it. I think it does give women a lot of hope. I, throughout my career, have just been it's been incredibly gratifying to see how many wonderful, strong, conservative, libertarian, free market minded women are out there and are joining the movement. And so I think it's just it can be daunting, but it's also just a really phenomenal time to be working as a conservative libertarian woman in America today. So I welcome those of you who are soon to join our ranks as you graduate from college. But Karin and Cameron, I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. And I really want to thank all of you who have joined us live on this webinar or are watching it afterwards. For those who are watching live, a few of you have asked if we will be posting this and recording it because you want to share it with friends or your daughters, and certainly we will. It'll be on the Goldwater Institute's YouTube channel. We at Goldwater are able to host programs like these and wonderful interns like Cameron because of the generosity of our supporters. So we really appreciate all of you. And if you're listening and you want to learn more about the Goldwater Institute, or you'd like to donate to support these programs or our work protecting freedom coast to coast, please visit goldwaterinstitute.org. And Karin, if our guests are interested in purchasing a copy of the Conservative Women's Guide or finding out more about how they can support NEW, where should they go?
Thank you. Yes, you can buy a copy on Amazon.com or on our website, www.enlightenedwomen.org. And any of your viewers are welcome to email me at Karin, Karin, at enlightenedwomen.org.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both again, and thank you all for joining us. Goodbye.